Man, the wild thing about politics today is that it's not just politics anymore. It's entertainment, it's theater, it's chaos on a stage, and nobody embodies that more than Marjorie Taylor Greene. Because when you look at her career, it's like this nonstop reel of controversies that make you stop and go, wait, did that really happen? And that's why we're diving into this. Because it's not just about left versus right. It's not even about traditional politics. It's about how one person figured out that in this crazy tension driven world, the louder you are, the wilder the stunt, the more outlandish the claim, the more power you can grab. And love her or hate her, you can't deny she's mastered that game. So buckle up because we're about to go through the top 5 wildest controversies of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And trust me, each one is crazier than the last. Man, when you start talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and conspiracy theory, it's like stepping into this alternate universe where the line between political rhetoric and straight up internet rabbit holes doesn't even exist. Because she's not just flirting with wild ideas, she's building her brand around them. And the most infamous one everybody remembers is the so-called Jewish space lasers thing, where she suggested that California wildfires could have been sparked by some kind of orbiting energy weapon tied to global elites. And when you hear that, you're like, wait, this is someone sitting in Congress making claims that sound like they came off a Reddit thread at 3 in the morning. But that's the thing. She's been connected to QAnon beliefs too, straight up buying into that narrative that there's this deep state cabal controlling everything. And at one point, she was liking and sharing posts that talked about executing Democratic leaders, which is insane when you realize the platform she holds. And instead of backing down, she kind of leaned into it like that whole I'm just asking questions vibe. But the questions were always framed around the most outlandish fringe theories, like mass shootings being false flags, or conspiracies about 9/11. And it makes you think, how does someone with those views end up elected? But the reality is, she tapped into this huge group of people who already felt disillusioned, who were already living in these echo chambers online, and she became their voice in the mainstream. And that's what's so crazy about it, because it's not just some random lady with a blog. It's a U.S. representative. And when she pushes these theories, whether it's about vaccines, elections, or wildfires, it carries weight. It validates the beliefs of people who already distrust the system. And suddenly the most extreme internet talk becomes dinner table conversation in regular homes. And what's really wild is that even when she's confronted, she doesn't fully deny it. She either pivots, doubles down, or plays it off like the media is twisting her words. So it becomes this cycle where every controversy just feeds into her persona as someone who tells the truth the establishment doesn't want you to hear. And that's why her conspiracy theories matter, not just because they're ridiculous on their own, but because they fuel this machine of outrage, identity, and division that keeps her relevant and keeps her base fired up. And you realize she's not just saying this stuff by accident. She's weaponizing it, because in today's political climate, being outrageous isn't a liability, it's a strategy. And she's mastered how to use conspiracies as gasoline on the fire of her career. Man, when you get into Marjorie Taylor Greene and the whole January 6th connections thing, it's one of those topics that just blows the roof off, because it shows how blurred the line has become between political loyalty, straight up chaos, and full-on culture war energy. Because she wasn't just some politician quietly sitting back while all that madness went down at the Capitol. She was one of the loudest voices amplifying the Stop the Steal movement, pumping up her base with this idea that the election was stolen, feeding that fire with nonstop rhetoric. And you've got to remember the atmosphere leading up to that day. People were already primed, angry, convinced their democracy was hijacked. And here she is right in the middle, aligning herself with Trump, cheering on the outrage, basically validating the energy that spilled over into violence. And even after the riot, when most politicians were scrambling to distance themselves from it, she's still out there defending the people who stormed the Capitol, calling them patriots, acting like they were victims of some government setup. And that's not just controversial, that's insane when you think about it, because this isn't a random fringe active, it's an elected representative excusing one of the darkest days in modern American history. And it goes deeper because reports came out about her allegedly communicating with organizers. There were whispers about tours being given before the attack, which she's denied. But the fact that it even became part of the conversation shows how deep her name got tied into that day. And then you add her constant doubling down afterwards, saying stuff like the government is persecuting innocent Americans while ignoring the fact that these were people who broke window, attacked police, and tried to stop a democratic process. And it paints this picture where she's not just a bystander, she's actively feeding this narrative that makes January 6th almost mythological to her base, like a righteous rebellion instead of a violent insurrection. And that's what makes her connections to it so wild, because she's taken something the rest of the world saw as a shameful, dangerous moment and turned it into this badge of honor to wear, a rallying cry, and in doing that, she keeps the energy alive. She keeps the anger alive. And it becomes part of her political identity because she's not just representing a district in Georgia, she's representing this movement that refuses to accept what happened, and she does it by standing shoulder to shoulder with the narrative that January 6th wasn't a tragedy, but some kind of proof that the system is broken. And that's why people say her connections to it aren't just about where she was or what she said that day, it's about the way she's kept feeding it ever since, like she knows her power comes from never letting that fire die out. Man, one of the wildest things about Marjorie Taylor Greene is how she goes after her colleague, because it's not like normal political disagreements, where people argue policy and then shake hands afterwards. She turns it into this full-blown street fight in the middle of Congress, and it feels less like C-SPAN and more like watching some trash talk press conference before a UFC because she's constantly calling people names, dropping insults, and going way past professional boundaries, like calling Democrats communists, traitors, or even enemies of America. And the crazy part is, she doesn't reserve that fire just for the other side. She'll go after her own party too, ripping into Republicans she thinks aren't loyal enough to Trump, calling them rhinos, weak, or sellouts. And it's wild to watch because you've got these old school politicians who are used to keeping things civil, suddenly getting ambushed by her with this scorched earth stuff. And one of the biggest examples was when she got into public beefs with figures like Liz Cheney or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, chasing AOC down hallways, yelling through doors, posting videos mocking her, and then screaming about socialism destroying America. And you look at that and think, how is this real life? This is Congress. But she treats it like a stage where the more outrageous she gets, the more her base cheers. And what makes it even crazier is how she embraces heckling as a tool. Like when Biden's up there giving the State of the Union and she's yelling in the middle of it, breaking every norm of respect that's supposed to come with that event. But she doesn't care, because her playbook is built on being the disruptor, and those harsh statements are part of her brand. And the truth is, it works, because every time she blows up at it makes the news cycle, it becomes a viral clip. And to her supporters, it's proof that she's fearless, that she's not afraid to say what needs to be said, even if to everyone else, it just looks like bullying or unhinged behavior. And you realize she's mastered this game where outrage is currency, where the harsher the attack, the more she dominates the spotlight. And instead of losing influence, she gains it, because in this polarized climate, people don't want compromise, they want a fight. And she's selling herself as the fighter who never holds back, even if it means torching relationships in her own workplace. And that's why her harsh statements stand out, because they're not just insults. They're calculated shots designed to keep her in the headlines, rile up her base, and reinforce this image that she's the warrior taking on the swamp, even if it means turning Congress into a circus. Man, the whole thing with Marjorie Taylor Greene and her social media bans is one of those stories where you realize just how much the game has changed. Because back in the day, if a politician said something crazy, it might get quoted in a newspaper or maybe replayed on the evening news. But now with social media, every word is amplified to millions instantly. In her case, it blew up so much that Twitter and Facebook straight up hit the brakes on her accounts, like permanent suspensions and timeouts, because she was pumping out nonstop COVID misinformation, vaccine conspiracies, anti-mask rant, basically using her platform as a megaphone for every single thing the medical establishment was trying to combat. And when they finally banned her, she didn't treat it like a setback. She flipped it into a weapon, saying she was being silenced, censored, targeted by big tech because she was telling the truth. And to her supporters, that narrative hit harder than anything she could have tweeted, because now she's not just a politician, she's a victim of the system, a fighter against censorship, and the ban itself became proof of her argument. That's the wild part, because in normal circumstances, getting banned from the biggest social platforms would kill your reach, kill your influence. But for her, it actually juiced up her profile, made her more famous, and drove her base even deeper into that echo chamber. If they're shutting her down, she must be over the target. And then Elon takes over Twitter, rebrands it as X, and suddenly she's back, like the exile is over, which just reinforces her mythology of surviving the cancel machine. And the craziest part is that she never softened her she never said, okay, maybe I'll dial it down to avoid this happening again. She came back swinging with the exact same intensity, which tells you that for her the bans weren't a punishment. They were fuel, a way to build her identity as the outlaw politician who won't be tamed. And that's what makes it so fascinating, because on one hand, she was spreading really dangerous misinformation during a global pandemic, stuff that public health experts said literally cost lives. But on the other hand, she spun the fallout into political gold, using censorship as a badge of honor. That's the thing about her, man. Every controversy, even getting kicked off the biggest platforms in the world, becomes part of her brand, part of the story she's selling. And instead of sinking her, it just makes her harder to ignore. When you talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene in political stunts, you're talking about somebody who understands that in today's world, politics isn't just about policy or passing bills. It's about theater. It's about creating moments that explode online and turn into viral clips. And she's mastered that playbook in a way that honestly feels more like pro wrestling than governing, because everything she does has this over-the-top shock value quality to it. Like when she heckled Joe Biden during the State of the Union, screaming liar while the cameras were rolling, and you could see the split reaction immediately. Half the country was like, this is disgraceful, and the other half was like, finally someone with the guts to say it. And that's exactly what she wanted, because it turned her into the headline of the night, not Biden, not the policy. And she keeps doing this with stunts like bringing giant posters of Hunter Biden's alleged scandals into committee hearings, holding them up like she's presenting evidence at a circus trial. And it's not about facts, it's about creating a spectacle that cable news will reap. And then you've got the way she leans into protest theatrics, like wearing bold slogans across her clothing, chasing down colleagues in the halls with cameras, even showing up at events where she knows she'll be booed just to use the reaction as proof that she's triggering the lib. And the craziest part is that these stunts work, because in the modern political climate, outrage is more valuable than legislation. Attention is the currency, and she's figured out that pulling off some wild meme-worthy moment will do more for her fundraising and influence than quietly drafting a bill ever could. And it's not accidental either, it's strategy. She knows the optics of being the loudest, most disruptive person in the room creates this aura of fearlessness for her base, and it makes her enemies lose their minds, which only fuels her support even more. And you can tell she studies this stuff, because she times these stunts for maximum exposure, like dropping something outrageous right before the weekend news cycle so it lingers longer, doing it in high-profile settings where the cameras can't look away. And what's wild is that even people who despise her can't stop talking about her, which is the whole point, because in her world, bad press isn't bad at all, it's just free market. And that's why when you break down her political stunts, you see someone who's turned Congress into a stage show, using conflict, props, insults, and shock tactics as tools not just to stay relevant but to dominate the conversation. And love her or hate her, she's proven that in this era the loudest person in the room usually wins. Man, when you really sit back and look at the wildest controversies of Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's like watching a highlight reel of modern American politics turned upside down. Because she's not just some random figure making noise, she's a walking, talking example of how outrage has become the fuel of the system. And whether it's conspiracy theories about space lasers, defending January 6th, trash-talking her colleagues like it's a schoolyard, getting banned from social media and turning it into a victory lap, or pulling these outrageous stunts that dominate the headlines, the through line is always the same: attention. Because she understands better than most that in this environment it's not about being right, it's about being loud. And she's made a career out of being the loudest voice in the room, and that's why people either love her or absolutely can't stand her. There's no middle ground. And that polarization is the game, man. That's the new currency in politics, and it's wild because you look at it and think, how did we get here? But at the same time you realize this is exactly where we were headed,
with social media, with outrage culture, with everyone fighting for clicks and clips, and she just plays that game without shame. So whether you see her as a fighter or a clown, the fact is she's impossible to ignore, and that says a lot about where the system is right now. Anyway, that's the ride, man. Those are the controversies. Thanks for hanging with me through the madness. I appreciate you guys for sticking around, sending good vibes your way. Good luck with whatever you're chasing, and thank you for tuning in. Means the world.